Well, good morning. So I just wanted to I've got a few comments to make at the start. So welcome to Talking Economics. It's organised by the Economics Observatory and Bristol Ideas. The Festival of Economics, now in its 10th year, features economists and other experts from all over the world. And this is the first year that we've run these additional morning sessions. So please follow both the Economics Observatory and Bristol Ideas on Twitter and join in the discussion using the hashtag Talking Economics and Economics Fest. So I'm Phil Aldrick. As Ramesh said, I'm 4 weeks into a new job at Bloomberg, covering economics, and it really has been an extraordinarily exciting few years or couple of years now as an economics journalist. Now, this panel is work and pay. It's working from home or not working at all. And so I just wanted to start by saying that in a way this is the hot topic of the moment, really. Work and pay and working patterns, working from home. 0 hours contracts, all of these issues are just are really sort of critical issues for now. It's the most important issue that the Treasury is looking at. It's the most important factor that the Bank of England is looking at in terms of rate decisions. We've had this furlough scheme, which was this enormous innovation and has proved to be incredibly successful at keeping everyone in work. What will happen to wages? This has got to be one of the big questions right now. There's the labour shortages, the HGV, hospitality problems. There's inflation rising, so we have a living standard squeeze potentially upon us. How will working from home evolve? What is happening with the Great Resignation, which is taking place in a lot of the advanced economies? We're seeing it in the US in a very large way, and we've had the data yesterday from the ONS, which showed that there's a lot of job-to-job moves, and the resignations are increasingly high as people kind of repurpose themselves for different jobs. So to discuss that and more, we have this fantastic panel. So let me introduce them. Hugh Dixon, Head of Economics, Cardiff Business School, macroeconomics expert on inflation. And we've got Kudsia, Batool, Head of Equalities and Strategy at the Trades Union Congress. She has a focus on, she's focusing on the unequal impact of the pandemic. We've got Helen Simpson, who is the local member of the troop, Professor of Economics here at the University of Bristol. She's particularly interested in urban economics. And Graeme Roy, Professor of Economics and Dean of External Engagement at the University of Glasgow. And he's got particular expertise on productivity and public policy. So I just thought I'd hand over to you all one by one to run through some opening thoughts for a few minutes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Phil. So just to sort of set the scene, if you like, for some of my colleagues here, I think there's two sorts of things going on. If we look at the short run, there's a huge labour market readjustment. Partly this is demand side. There's been a big switch in the nature of expenditures. Households have switched to buying things away from services. Partly that during the pandemic, in the height of it, it was necessity. They couldn't spend money on services. But there's still a question. Expenditure on services has come back up, but it hasn't come back to where it was. Will it go back to where it was, or has there been a permanent switch? So that's like on the demand side. On the supply side, of course, households, as you said, there's great resignation. There's been a huge amount there's been jobs lost. A lot of people are thinking of changing their jobs. So on the demand and supply side, you've got this huge, if you like, turbulence. And what we know from the history of labour markets is that labour markets adjustment is quite costly. It takes time. New people have to be trained. So there's a lot of adjustment costs associated with changes in the labour market. And we're seeing these now big time. And I think that's going to be going on for a while, to focus on the labour market. Before I get on to just mention something about wages. In the longer term, we've got a demographic change. We've got a little dip in the population. So if you look at the age distribution, there's a dip round about 20 years old. So there's a lot fewer people in late teens and early 20s than there normally are. So in this sense, there's less people are going to be coming into the labour market in this year and the next few years. So it's a slightly longer-term labour shortage, which may well be developing. That will eventually go away, but it's there. And of course, you've also got another aspect of it, which is the great retiring. A lot of older people who were thinking, well, shall I work, shall I not work? They've not been working, so they've decided to leave the labour force. You've got this fall in the participation rates amongst older workers. So there's demand and supply side effects going. And so what will happen to wages, that depends really. I'm not really a demand and supply guy, but in this case I would say it really will be influenced by which of these forces tends to predominate. And we'll wait and see. Currently the wage data is very difficult to interpret because there's been these composition effects. So the COVID affected very much the lower paid workers. So average wages of those people employed seem to have shot up. You know, I've seen figures of 7 or 8%, depending how you measure for it. You can adjust for that to some extent. And you can look at posted wage prices. So recent research by NISA looking at adverts for jobs thought that wage inflation is about 2%. Obviously, with inflation, is set to go up to 5% by April. It's 4.2% today, and it's going to rise, keep on rising, and may rise beyond that. The month-on-month inflation for this month was 1.1%. It's the highest month-on-month level of inflation since April 1993, a very, very long time. So it's a huge increase, and the average increase of inflation in the last few months. By month, it's equivalent to about 6% annual rate of inflation. So we could be in sight for a lot more even than the Bank of England says. But I better stop there.
Yep. Great. Thanks very much, Hugh. Helen, have you got some opening thoughts? Working from home, I think you're particularly...
Yes. So I'd like to say a few things about working from home and about cities. So first of all, a brief nostalgia trip. Last time I was here on this stage 2 years ago, I was talking about cities and left behind places. And what I highlighted then was that what we know is that cities really draw in high-skill individuals into high-wage professions and also draw in the firms that want to recruit those types of individuals. And what lockdown showed us was really that it was exactly those high-wage professions in the service sector in cities. It was these individuals who were able to work from home. They found it most easy to transition to working from home. What the lockdown also showed us was the dependence of other lower-wage jobs on the presence of those high-wage individuals in city centres. So footfall in city centres is hugely important for supporting lower wage retail service sector jobs. So we saw that very clearly. Local demand really matters. Where people spend their money really matters for supporting these jobs. So the question now is how much do we think working from home will persist? And we might want to think about what the implications of working from home will be. We can raise a few questions that we can discuss during the rest of the session. So who do we think might work from home? If working from home becomes a big thing, where will individuals choose to live? Where will the firms that employ them choose to locate if they no longer have to locate in expensive city centres? And what will the implications of working from home be for productivity and hence for people's pay and also for inequality? So I personally don't like working from home. I personally think that people will want to return to the office and they will want to return to cities. So why are cities important? So cities don't just attract bright young talent. I think they also train them and they also give people access to very good careers. So where you work really, I think it does matter for your productivity and hence your pay, your career prospects, your promotion. When we thought about working from home during the pandemic, we thought in quite a short-term way, am I more productive in my job, performing it from my bedroom, home office, kitchen, compared to commuting every day in the office and performing that same role with my colleagues? That's quite a short-term way of looking at it. I want to think more about the longer-term job prospects. Going into the office, you learn very specific things about your company, you get trained. This longer-term productivity matters as well. So I'll just end on a few things which I know other people are going to touch on, but we may as well complement each other. So I think, who will work from home? We knew even before the pandemic that women were more likely to choose jobs with shorter commutes than men so that they could fit their job around childcare, domestic responsibilities. I think that will only increase, and I do think that has implications for women's pay and careers and progression. I also think there are potentially wider inequality points here. Who has access to these jobs which you're able to perform from home, more highly educated individuals versus individuals with lower education levels who might not be able to access these jobs. And the last thing, because I was introduced as an urban economist, if people really do work from home more, change where they live, change where firms locate, this could potentially have a few implications for the government's levelling up agenda. I don't think it would do a big deal here, but I think it does have implications for where people spend their money and where those local services, restaurants, retail then locates in response to where people choose to spend their working day. So I will, having raised those, I will now shut up and pass on.
Thanks very much. And Kudsia, I think you'll probably pick up on a few of these points about equalities that come out of working from home.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you raised working from home. I'm a big endorser of flexible working, with working from home as one strand of that. I don't know if anybody picked up the other day, but the Bank of England, one of their chiefs said, working from home is bad for women's prospects at work. And that's great. If women didn't already have it fairly crap at work, that would be a massive issue. Because structural inequality existed long before the pandemic, right? And the pandemic blew the covers off it and then entrenched it further. So working from home, is not without its faults, but I don't think it's the only thing holding women back at work when we look at things like gender pay gap, when we look at how work is designed, when we look at sexual harassment that women suffer, and now we can add working from home as something that hinders women's prospects in the job as well. But I'm also really keen on talking about ways to make it work. So, Phil, you mentioned the labour market stats that came out yesterday, and I think that's a really good place to start, because what they showed was that they were the first set of stats to come out since the end of furlough, and there was a real concern, certainly on our part, that that would lead to job losses, and the stats actually showed that didn't happen, and that was a real welcome addition. But what it did show was that it's not all rosy, that there are still massive problems, and the impact on the pandemic on young workers, on black workers, on those with caring responsibilities, on disabled workers is still there, right? And I want to focus particularly on the unemployment rate. So the unemployment rate slowed, which is great, but it didn't slow as fast for black workers as it did for white workers, and we really need to look at the factors around that and why that is happening. And we also need to look that it showed us that, pay, since April 2021, real pay has gone down. And at the Tory conference, we were promised a pay surge. I don't know what a pay surge is or what it looks like, but I'm excited to receive it. But it wasn't in the stats. We didn't see that. And what we see is people are still struggling. And we really, really need to fast track the £10 minimum wage. That has to happen to really help people get out of poverty. We also saw that unemployment rates didn't slow quickly enough for BME workers, and this horrible spectre which looms around insecure work and 0 hours contracts. That is really holding people back, it's really stopping people from thriving, and it's trapping people in poverty. And when I talk about 0 hours contracts, I'm talking about key service workers, public sector workers, people that deliver for us, who are stuck in this cycle of not having enough money, having to visit food banks, having to go into debt, having to take on second jobs because the jobs that they're doing are insecure. Don't know where the next shift is coming from, don't know where the next pay packet is coming from. And actually, the last time I spoke to economists about this, they said, but Kudsia, the flexibility, it's fabulous. I said, yeah, but not for the worker. Flexibility in the dynamic of insecure work and insecure contracts. Sorry, Hugh, I don't know why I was looking at you when I said that, by the way, it wasn't you. Tends to be from the employer on the employee, leaving workers with no idea of where money is coming from next. And the furlough scheme, like I said, it saved so many jobs and saved so many industries. And I will say it was a big success of economists and the unions that made that happen. And it was an 11th hour decision. And what we really need is a short-term working scheme to replace furlough, to make sure that we are future-proofing our economy and future-proofing it against pandemics and what's coming around the corner.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point about the furlough scheme, which we have a permanent, some kind of permanent scheme. The Germans have had it, the short-time work scheme that pre-existed and actually saved a lot of jobs in the financial crisis, so it's been up and running for ages. And actually Denmark has got this flex security policy where obviously there's this massive safety net, but it works with very flexible labour markets. Graeme, I just wanted to bring you in now. If you would, I think you want to talk about public policy and productivity, etc.
Yes, I mean, just it would be good to get into the wider discussion quickly, but just picking up on some of the points that have been made already. Working from home or working at home is something that's going to be one of the legacies of this crisis. I think it may be the start of the pandemic, we all thought this was the new future, and probably moved back a bit from then. But I think there's going to be much more of that hybrid working, even just now with the restrictions having eased. I think about a third of working age adults are either working at home all the time or working in some form of hybrid. But picking up the points, I think in many ways that working at home is an opportunity for many people if it's right for them, if they've got the flexibility to be able to choose that it's right for them. So ideas around being able to broaden out the commuting patterns. If you get caring responsibilities, being able to work from home might broaden out the jobs that you could get, because you can now actually reach out beyond to a wider commuting distance you had in the past, because you're not physically having to travel there every day. There might be opportunities for people in terms of well-being, so the fact that you can actually not stuck in the tube for an hour every day, that actually being able to be at your home desk, whatever works, and that could be really good. But there are potential, yes, in terms of inequalities in all of this. So the types of jobs where you can work from home, that your ability to have the income in order to be able to work from home. So is your house set up? I'm sure many of us at the start of lockdown who were working from dining tables or ironing boards. But if you have the income, then you can start to invest in desks and proper equipment, etc. But not everyone can do that. Again, huge inequalities in terms of access to simple things like the internet. So up in Scotland, around about 20% of people in the lowest SIMD, which is our index of multiple deprivation, don't have access to internet. But in the top 20%, it's less than 5%. And people with a learning disability or a long-term health condition, access to internet for many people is only tracking about 70% against 96, 97% for people who don't have these conditions. So the presumption that working from home is good for everybody has a lot of caveats in all of that in there. And the one final thing I would say is that there's lots of debates about whether or not working from home is good for productivity, and there's still conflicting evidence about whether that is or isn't the case. But one of the things I think is increasingly important now is our understanding about the importance of good work. So the quality of work that we have isn't just important for people's well-being, but is actually also ultimately crucial to what we can get around productivity. And it's understanding what makes a good job and how that might be impacted from working from home. So Helen mentioned stuff around relationships, being able to interact with your colleagues. That again always shows up as being something that comes out as a top measure in terms of a good quality job. How are you going to do that if everyone's working at home, and how do you move to that hybrid form that you can have those interactions, but those interactions don't discriminate against people who have caring responsibilities and the like who can't do it. So I think there's lots of different things that will be really useful to discuss. I think one thing I would say is that we genuinely don't know what the long-term effects of this will be.
Yeah. It's this great experiment that's going on. Basically, we're living through it. I just want to mention we will come to questions, so do sort of jot down thoughts or any notes from what any of our esteemed panelists say. Just picking up, Helen, you were saying you don't like working from home. I have to say I'm the same. I wasn't very keen on working from home, and there was in terms of the the positive and the negative of it. There was some interesting research from the ONS which showed that bizarrely presenteeism seems to happen more when you're at home than when you're at the workplace, because people ended up taking half as many sick days, or fewer than half as many sick days when they were at home, and they were working twice as many hours overtime at home, obviously to sort of compensate, because there's obviously this kind of worker anxiety that kind of accompanies not being in the office, because you sense that discount to your value from your manager if he can't actually see you. And having been in a very busy newsroom at the Times, I know the editor likes to be able to point at you and shout at you and tell you you need to do things. Yesterday, I think a lot of the subjects comes back to ultimately will come back to wages and whether we get this the government pledges on us wage miracle. Yesterday's ONS data, my key takeaways, and I just thought I'd ask you if you could tell me what your thoughts were. But the key takeaways for me was that the furlough scheme, because it's the first data that we got after the furlough, as Kudsia was saying. So the furlough did work well. We've actually got more people in employment payrolls than we did before the pandemic. So we've bridged that gap. The second thing I thought was, we have lost 450,000 workers. There's 450,000 people who've disappeared from the workforce because of they've retired, they've resigned, the migrant labour has gone back home. People are moving jobs. There's more job-to-job moves than there have been in 20 years, which shows this incredible shift going on. And we have record levels of vacancies. So you feel like the labour market is tight. Starting salaries are going up. And if you're seeing massive job-to-job moves, that's a lot of starting salaries. And you feel like there is going to be this wage pressure, or there is an environment for wages to rise. There is an environment where labour may have the bargaining power that it didn't have once. Hugh, any thoughts?
Well, yes. Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you say, particularly about furlough. I mean, I was a little bit of a sceptic about furlough, not the first stage of furlough, because I thought the first stage fine, but the last one I wasn't quite clear, and I said, well, we'll see what happens at the end. And I think at the end it has worked well, and it was an expensive form of unemployment benefit. It did preserve jobs, so that's been a great success. In terms of the job wages and stuff, yeah, I think that's yet to be seen. I mean, the news is full of information about job shortages and so on, but there's still a question: are people getting jobs they want? I think you'll find that underneath the data, there's a lot of people still working in low-paid jobs they don't want to be in. So I think we've shaken up the mud, if you like, and it needs to settle. And again, that won't really be apparent. But certainly there is certainly a lot of things, like I mentioned, the demographic effects and other aspects, which would imply that the power is shifting to labour, and that we should probably expect real wages to rise. But they're going to need to rise quite a bit. If inflation is at 5% plus or 5.5%, that means just to keep your current level of living standards the same, your wage needs to rise by 5.5% or 6%. I know mine isn't going to rise by that, and I think not many people are going to see their wages rising by that. And we can lorry drivers. Well, yeah, I mean, new posts for lorry drivers, maybe they're rising, but there's still some lorry drivers have been underpaid for a variety of reasons. We can discuss that. But there's probably still a lot of lorry drivers who aren't seeing a big increase in their pay, and work conditions. There's other aspects as well, but. I better shut up there.
Are there signs that Labour is organising from Trade Union Congress and other unions? Are there signs that people are joining the unions, or is there activity going on which maybe take advantage of this kind of shift in the balance of power?
Yeah, so our membership has held steady and has increased in certain demographics during the pandemic, which shows that people are, unionising and they're joining their union, because I think wages tell a story. They only tell one part of the story, and the entire story is what is it like to be at work today? What are your terms and conditions? What is your salary? Are you doing a job that is allowing you to live and thrive and raise a family, or live the life in the way that you choose? And I think trade unions, particularly with the government we've got at the minute, are really best placed to be the broker between people in the world of work and their employees, and working on that job design and making sure that there are people to do the jobs, and the jobs that people are doing aren't exploitative. I thought what Helen and Graeme was saying was really interesting about flexible working and home working, because one of the key things to any kind of success is designing a job that it fits around and not trying to shoehorn roles into certain types and ways of work. And I think from our perspective, you know, workers have got to be at the heart of any conversation and any discussion. And are they organising? They are. And are we finding that there is increased negotiation and conversation? We are. And I think the recent fuel shortage and the supply chain shortage was a really interesting expose into what happens when you don't listen to what the movement has been saying about the terms and conditions that people are working to. Obviously, there were lots of reasons why we had labour shortages, which led to supply chain shortages. But the bottom line is people didn't want to do those jobs because they're crap jobs to do, because they're in crap terms and conditions. You know, we all saw the long queues in the run-up to Christmas with lorries parked by the side of the road where people weren't allowed access to toilets, they didn't have food. And fundamentally, the job that I do and the job that my colleagues in the movement do is make sure that people are guaranteed terms and conditions that don't put them in positions like that. Because it doesn't matter what the wage is. If you go to work and that's how you have to work, nobody's going to want to do it.
Yeah, terms and conditions are very much. So one of the things which I'm hearing about the current sort of shortages, and employers are having to respond not just with higher pay. They're having to say, I guarantee that you can work from home 2 days a week, or there is this new world of flexibility. Good jobs. Graeme, I think you're interested. You've looked into the subject of what is a good job and how we have good jobs and good work.
Yeah. So I think there's I think the good work comes in a number of different dimensions, but a lot of it's about the flexibility. Lots about employee voice. So what opportunities have you got to influence the job that you're doing? I think is key. Obviously, pay is part of it as well, and I think good work in itself, there's lots of interesting evidence, particularly coming out in Europe, about the advantages of good work in the broadest possible sense. So not just in terms of how an economist might think of it as being akin to the efficiency wage hypothesis. Actually, not only if you pay people higher wages are you getting better productivity, actually if you design a better quality job, does it feed through to greater levels of productivity. But I think that you start to move into thinking about, well, what's this all about? And actually, can you broaden it out to the role of a job, your work, in the wider objectives you're trying to achieve in public policy and society? So not just thinking about it from a purely economic point of view, but does this relate through to issues around what we're hearing earlier about in terms of public health? And actually, does that help you build a more resilient society and a more resilient economy if you can create good quality jobs and better quality jobs that can then tackle some of the challenges around inequalities, around public health, around issues around social justice, etc. If you can actually use the jobs that you're designing as a vehicle to help improve that, can you get some wider benefits through that come from that? I mean, just one interesting point about the wages point and the pressure on wages. It used to be, you go back 20 years, the way to tackle poverty was to get people into work. That was essentially the easy way that we would do it. It was, you had relative high levels of unemployment. If you can tackle unemployment, then actually that's your way of tackling poverty. But again, in Scotland, where we do our work, 1 in 4 kids in Scotland live in a household that is in relative poverty. And now we've got a position where the number of households in poverty in Scotland, 1 in every 2 have somebody working. So just getting a job, getting people into work is no longer the easy solution in terms of how we tackle poverty. So we're going to make inroads into these quite, really sobering statistics about the numbers of people in poverty. Then you've got to start to think about the quality of the jobs, because it's not just jobs anymore. It's about that whole purpose around pay and the design of the work. And I think one of the lessons from the potential pandemic, we're hearing in the discussion this morning, I think, is to have that broader view around the quality of your job and how that links into the economy and the wider objectives you have in society.
Yeah, it's tough, isn't it? Because obviously there are going to be jobs that people just don't want to do. And I mean, being a HGV, long haul lorry driver is going to be tough, and you're going to be sleeping in the cab, and I can't imagine living on the road like that. So I mean, on the issue of in-work poverty, the fact is that in the last since 2015, when the government did take a step change in the minimum wage, it's striking how these big increases in the minimum wage have not delivered households out of in-work poverty. And I don't understand that. Helen, do you have any? Do you know why that is?
I don't know that much about it, but I would think it would be due to the interaction between what you're paid per hour and how many hours you're actually working. So although we have a lot of people in work, I suspect a lot of people are in part-time work or on these 0-hour contracts that we've been discussing essentially. So, I mean, we know for a long time pre-pandemic that, I don't know, what we might call median wages have not been going up, and that what economists might say is sort of the labour share in income has not been rising, or it's probably been falling. And we know that companies have been making higher profits. And so given that's been happening, you might think now maybe this is time for further wage increases, because if some of these very big, very profitable firms, they might well be able to absorb these higher wage increases without passing them on to consumers in the form of higher prices. So I think this is it's a longer term thing that wages have just been stagnant, apart from those at the very top. And perhaps this is a time for change. But until the conditions around these jobs change, you raising the minimum wage will do something, but it won't do enough, I don't think.
Well, actually, Hugh, because obviously living standards and wages, the key bit there is inflation, is what's happening with inflation. And there's two ways in which employers can raise wages without raising prices. So there's only two ways in which they can raise wages and basically continue to operate. And one is that they have to take a cut in their profit margin, as you were suggesting, Helen, and the other is that they pass the cost on prices. So then basically you're just running to stand still the whole time with wages. So Hugh, is there capacity for companies to trim their margins? Are they going to do it? Is this shift between this balance of power that now that there's such a shortage of workers, it seems that employers we're going to see less money shared out between shareholders and more money shared with the staff?
I think that there's a difference between could and should here, the moral imperative. If you're an individual firm, part of the issue is that a lot of firms try and exercise their monopsony power, the fact that they're a big buyer of labour and that labour isn't organised, to try and drive wages down to the lowest level they can. And this raises a rather paradoxical situation, particularly in low-paid jobs, where you have an excess, where you can't find enough workers to fill the post that you want to fill, but it's still in your interest to do that. But so the question is, what will happen? Well, if wages go up, firms will raise their prices if they can. The only thing that's going to stop them doing that is if it damages their profits and businesses. They're not going to do it out of the kindness of their hearts unless they're a charity or something like that. So I think that's the issue. So it's a little bit difficult to say what will happen. It's this issue of what's called pass-through, when costs go up, what happens to prices. It's always very difficult to predict. It's not 100%, so that some of it will be absorbed, but some of it won't. I'll just give you the example from today's inflation figures. So VAT went up 7.5% on the hospitality business. Was it all passed on? No, in fact, hardly any of it was passed on when you look at the figures this morning. But we didn't know that until it actually happened. So it's a difficult one to answer that one. I think wages. But I will just come back a little bit if that's what you were saying. And I think the other thing with household incomes is it's worse than we thought, really, because if the ONS did some very interesting figure. They looked at real income after you've done the necessities, housing and all that sort of stuff, and that's been stagnant since 2005. Median household income hasn't gone up since 2005. And so, mean income's hardly gone up since the great financial recession. So that's total stuff. So there's a lot of necessities now. You've got to have a mobile phone, you've got to have an internet connection. It's not, in the past, relatively poor households, they could rent somewhere to live, they could afford They'd have to spend a lot of money on food, but they could do it. Whereas nowadays, it's much more difficult to do that now, I think, just to get those basics, even if you're working.
Yeah, the amount of discretionary income available has shrunk because we have loads more things which we just expect.
Perfect.
Phil, can I just add one thing on to what Hugh said, which is really important? The housing costs and childcare costs are crippling people.
Yeah.
And I think it almost doesn't matter what we do with wages if we don't address those two issues as well, and also sick pay, because they are factors that are really trapping people in the kind of poverty that Graeme was talking about, where it doesn't matter how fast you run, you know, your entire salary is going on your rent, and your entire salary is then going on your childcare, and then you're sick, and actually you drop to whatever statutory sick pay is, it's like £95 a week. You know, by the time you get back on your feet, you're going to be in debt. And we're finding this not just for a small group of people, but millions of people, and people in, you know, really what we would, those of you old like me, would think, you know, in good jobs like nurses, teachers, paramedics. So there's, like Graeme said, Hugh said, it's one thing, but it's not the only thing.
Yeah, the safety net is sort of the uncosted part of pay, which obviously the state is providing. But yes, and actually then you have all these additional costs because I mean, your rent isn't really in the inflation figures actually properly.
It is a little bit, but we needn't go in there. But it's not in CPI. It's in CPIH, but not CPI. But better not go there.
Yeah, too technical. I mean, one thing I just wondered if anyone had any. I mean, actually, so from what you were saying, Kudsia, it's obvious that we kind of need. On the panel, does the panel think that we need some kind of better unemployment scheme? So something which would replace the furlough scheme. So actually, I'm curious. I mean, do we need something like the short-time working scheme that the Germans have? Which is significantly stronger, not just a little bit better than the unemployment benefits or the universal credit arrangements, but some completely different thing which we've learned from the pandemic that we should be introducing. Do you think we need this kind of radical change here in the UK? Hugh, I'll take you. I'll go one by one. Hugh, is it yes or no?
Briefly, yes, but there's a lot of detail there, and our institutions are very different to Denmark. Our social institutions and labour market institutions are very different to Denmark and Germany. There's a whole package that goes with it.
Yeah. And so it's a lot more complicated than just yes.
I think so. Yeah, but yes is if you want the answer. Yes.
Yeah. Helen, I mean.
Probably yes, but I don't know that much about it. My guess is that, you know, as Hugh said, it's a completely different setup. So there'll be, you know, probably some quite generous unemployment benefits. If you become unemployed in Germany, you'll get a huge fraction of your salary, even if you're on quite a high salary. But you'll have been paying very high levels of social security contributions in order to get to that outcome. So, you know, this comes with, we'd probably also have to make very big changes to the tax system in order to raise that amount of revenue to then pay for this. I mean, we could design something that's more progressive. I'm sure it could be designed, and I'm sure it could be improved. I know it's not quite on the topic, but the other thing, when you said there's two reasons why, you know, wages could go up, the other thing that's really important that we probably should touch on at some point is productivity, and the fact that productivity has been appallingly gone down and stagnant since 2007. That's another thing to push up wages, and that needs dealing with. Yeah, but I'll shut up now.
I would assume that you would support the some kind of perpetual furlough safety net scheme then.
Yeah, and I think, but it isn't a simple answer, and it's about what do we do to stop, you know, poverty creeping in? What do we do for a safety net? But also, what do we do to eradicate in-work poverty? And how do we stop people, you know, obviously people will be out of work, that's just the way it is, but I think the problem we have is that there are so many people in work who just aren't getting the benefits from being in work, and we really need to address those as well. And I've talked, and I will always talk about casualisation, insecure work, 0 hours contracts, and the fact that the exploitative nature of those roles really does in many, many instances, lead people to be better off if they are not in work. So the answer is yes, of course, a better safety net, but also a look at work and terms and conditions in the round.
Yeah. And Graeme?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think there was lots of discussion, I guess, during the pandemic about build back better and radical thinking. We had the question this morning about were we actually being bold enough in thinking about this. So I think now is the time to have a look at all of that. I think one of the things, just I agree with other panellists as well, I think sometimes we can look at Denmark and say, oh, if only we implemented that, but actually it's much more complex than that. The whole system's completely different. Or we look at things like universal basic income or a minimum income guarantee, and again, we think, look at these fantastic, enormous changes, let's do them. But then again, there's actually a lot more we could do, small scale, baby steps that would make a huge difference even before we think about these ambitious things. So it's not to say we shouldn't be ambitious and think about radical change, but actually there's a lot more we could do at practical levels to sort things like incentives to be in work or being out of work, or what happens if you work more hours and how your benefits are change as a result of that. There's a lot more we can do, and I think in a simple level to make things more effective.
So it's a good idea in principle, but in practice, it sounds like it's very, very. It's the turning an oil tanker issue. It'll take a very long time to even get the UK into a position where we could introduce something a bit more like those systems. So do start thinking about questions for the panel. Just on working, the whole sort of working from home sort of transformation nowadays. Helen, I think there's some work by University of Nottingham economist Paul Mizzen, he found that the workers want the flexibility to work from home 2 or 3 days a week, but employers want only to give 1 day a week maximum. So there is going to be this tension, isn't there, between what the staff want and what the employers want. It's going to be tricky.
I mean, I think employers recognise the benefits of bringing their staff together in the office. They've been organising in this way for a long time. They also recognise the benefits of locating in cities where there are other firms like them. And so economists talk about these benefits of density and benefits of agglomeration, and I think these are true. And employers clearly see that businesses are more profitable if they can bring people to the office. Obviously, they can see they can cut some costs by having people working from home, but I reckon the productivity benefits must outweigh that. So, yeah, I'm sorry, I've lost the question, but I think employers will want that to happen. I also saw something the other day about, what's happening in terms of recruitment, and employers are advertising jobs for people to come into the workplace. They're not advertising vacancies in working from home jobs. They want people to come
They're
back.
saying you should come back. We're not. Does anyone here, because obviously working from home is something which I think we all kind of have experienced. Does anyone have any questions or comments they want to make about the did it work for you? This is one of the things about you found over the pandemic, is that the idea of working from home and having that flexibility was quite different from the actual event of not mixing with colleagues and not getting, as you're saying, this kind of creative impetus which is a sort of productivity engine, as it were. I mean, something which you
So I think one of the things, again, this comes back to the point I was making, that we can make some bold claims about is working from home good or bad for productivity. I think it's once you start to unpick it, that's where there's potentially opportunities, but where you do need to think about how you balance working at home with being in the office. So again, I'm sure everyone's experience was that when we immediately switched to working from home, things that we were already doing and relationships that we already had were relatively easy to continue and to keep working there. It's the new stuff, it's the new relationships, it's the new innovations, it's the new interactions that are the much more difficult things to do working from home. And I think, thinking back to the productivity puzzle, this there's an opportunity. How big it is, again, is an open question, but there's an opportunity around thinking about how you can use this move to working at home to be more innovative about how you develop ideas, how do you work. So I'm sure, again, a number of us who've gone back to that hybrid of sometimes being at home, sometimes being in the office. A number of times we end up going into the office to sit on Zoom, to Zoom people who are sitting working at home, is just complete nonsense. So it's thinking about, and the really good businesses will be really thinking about how do you maximise that balance between providing opportunities to work from home and to save costs and to give people greater flexibility if that's what they want. But then you use the time when people do come into the offices to maximum effect to make the change. And that's the stuff I don't think we've cracked yet. But I think there's a real potential to be innovative, and the best businesses will be thinking about how they can be the most innovative in that regard.
There was Jonathan Haskell, who's one of the Bank of England policymakers, gave a speech the other day where he was talking about this stuff and how the internet. Some economists think the internet has just been the biggest waste of time that man has ever come up with. I mean, watching cat videos has decimated productivity in some people's opinions. But I mean, Haskell was saying that this moment is actually going to be the catalyst for when we begin to see that the internet really is sort of going to change society for the better and help with the productivity. And his point was that you can have this ability to work from wherever. You can have a much. You could work in London from Bristol and be able to just come into the office once or twice a week, and it actually functions. And it's this process that will lead to the great transformations of in productivity that we need to see. He's this optimist about productivity, but
can I just say, but there is a real risk there of creating a two-tier workforce between those jobs that can be done from home and those jobs that can't be done from home. And of course, during the pandemic, the jobs that ran this country, the key worker roles, aren't roles that are home working roles, but what we need to do is, I think, blow it all out of the water and start with flexible working, which has got things like remote working and working from home at its core for jobs that can. But also, what does flexibility in other roles look like? Does it look like annualised hours? Does it look like shift working? And really design it around the people doing the job.
Yeah.
But also, what I just really want to stress is, personally, I love the balance of working from home. I can fit it around my life. It suits me. I was saying to Graeme yesterday, I have a 6-year-old son, and the pandemic, I realised I didn't know him. I didn't know this child, and working from home has helped me redress that balance. But for women and for disabled workers, working from home is a real game changer in terms of resetting systemic inequality, particularly for disabled workers. We did a big bit of research right towards the end of the pandemic, and we polled disabled workers, and they were saying, this has changed my working life and my working experience in a way that it never could. And one of the things that we want to see come out of the pandemic is working from home to be a right for disabled workers as a reasonable adjustment, and for employers to work with employees to build their jobs around the people doing the jobs. Because it goes back to that supply chain issue, it goes back to people doing the roles. And I think, even though jobs won't be advertised as working from home jobs, jobs that are advertised as flexible jobs are the jobs people are going to go for.
Yeah, and actually it's a very good point that obviously if you are going to be working from home, if you can have that flexibility, you're probably going to want to make sure that the safeguards, employment safeguards are very strong, because I mean, like that ONS report, which suggested that people got more anxious working from home, so they actually put in more work. And then the other thing in that report was that actually they got lower bonuses. So if being in the office clearly did count. And I think you were saying, Kudsia, that Bank of England, Catherine Mann, I think it was, who was saying that that women may end up being suffer quite significantly if they choose to work at home more. So there are lots of considerations there. Hugh, do you have any?
Yeah, well, I could sort of come back a little bit to my opening things. I think there's been these shifts in behaviour, in expenditure and supply, partly by force majeure, of course, with the pandemic. But human beings are very much habit driven, and a lot of economic theory nowadays, certainly macro, emphasises habit formation, the role of habits, and so it's a little bit interesting to see, and again, it will only become the owl of Minerva flies at dusk, so we only really know what's happened after it's happened. And so what we'll see, it's interesting to see how much of this is permanent. So, people might be all into working from home now, but, the things that Graeme was talking about, you get a bit lonely, and or you miss your colleagues and all that sort of stuff. Maybe our preferences will go back, but obviously they'll probably go back to a new normal, not back to necessarily what it was before, because I think there has been a permanent shift there. But how big that shift is, I think, still remains to be seen. Whether I think whether it's 3 days a week is a norm, 4 days a week is a norm, that remains to be seen.
Helen?
I mean, I would like to perhaps ask some of the young people in the audience, the lot of young people in the audience, whether, us sat up here, we're sort of the wrong generation to answer this question, because, we probably, some of us have kids at home, so yes, working from home does make life easier. But, if you're about to enter the workforce, what do you want from a job? My guess is that you want to go and interact with other young people in the workplace, and that's actually the type of job that you would like, and I suspect that's the type of job employers would like you to have as well. Particularly, if you're in a house share, working from home is probably a nightmare. Is my impression from when I first moved to London. The place I lived in, I couldn't imagine working from home from there. So I'd like to ask you what you think. Maybe it works for 30-somethings with kids, and that's what they want. But if you're 22, is that really what you want?
Well, have you enjoyed studying from home, looking at lectures on Panopto? Is that how you want the rest of your life to be?
Lots of shaking heads. Actually, I've got a friend who's a couple of friends who are architects, and they've and right at the start of lockdown, they had to basically send all their young trainees home, because there's no way that they not send them home, but everyone was working from home, but they had to put them on furlough, because there was no way that they could learn the skills to become an architect remotely. They had to be sort of looking over the architect's, the senior architect's shoulder to see what was going on. So there was these companies, there's small architect practices, and I thought it was a classic example of actually you can entrench all sorts of problematic intergenerational inequalities if if there aren't, if people make the wrong choices, or if there was lockdowns forever, and for these very reasons, that the skills would never have been garnered, and the opportunities would be lost. So I think obviously it sounds, from just talking to people, it sounds like coming to the office is quite a useful thing. Do we have any questions on any of the subjects here?
We're going into Q&A type of questions.
Yep.
So I think with...
sorry, could we just wait for the mic to come around? Thanks.
News reports of PwC offering employees to permanently work from home. Sometimes I think there's this reawakening of the concern of the death of the city. And I'm kind of wondering what the panel might think about maybe if there isn't a death of the city, if we have a higher proportion of workers working from home, what that might mean for inequality. I know the panel's touched on inequality a few times over the past hour. So I'll maybe want to be a bit more demanding and ask about not just inequality, but regional inequality, racial inequality, and what's the third one? Gender inequality as well. So what's the impact of remote working on those three forms of inequality?
Because I think it's one of your specialist
right
subjects.
In my wheelhouse. The short answer is that there's already massive regional inequality. We were talking earlier, weren't we, about where the home working jobs are located. We did some research, and there are some places in the West Midlands there are no home working jobs because it's a massively unequal system already. What we do know is that women workers and disabled workers are telling us that to level the playing field, we would like more flexible working jobs with home working as one part of that flexibility. But what we also know is if you invest in women workers, that money is invested locally. We know that, you know, that's how you regenerate local areas, that's how you regenerate local places. I don't know what the impact of that for the cities will be, because obviously you won't have that same footfall in and out of the cities in the same way, and the areas you spoke about would be apparent. But in terms of inequality in job roles and access to jobs, home working and flexible working isn't a deterrent, it's actually a massive incentive. But you have got to look at other things as well, like gender pay gap reporting, like any structural discrimination that might exist, say, in application processes, in progression, in access to training and skills, and also equality impact assessment. So if you're going to make those decisions, you've got to look at it through the lens of how it's going to impact any particular group before that decision is made. So there isn't a blanket answer, really. It has got to be, you've got to do that as a whole, one of a range of things, to find out what the impact is going to be and then do that thing.
And just to pick up on the racial inequality stuff, is there, you mentioned that unemployment is proving more sticky for black people. Is there any reason? Have you guys got any?
Yeah. So we know that where a lot of the black jobs are concentrated are in areas that were hit hard by the pandemic, around care, retail, leisure sectors, hospitality, and also that a lot of black people in this country are on 0 hours or casualised contracts. And so we know that the issues I raised about those jobs do disproportionately disadvantage black people. But also we know through the work that we're doing, through the work the Anti-Racism Task Force from the TUC is doing, is that there's massive structural inequality in the employment market as it is. There's structural inequality in application processes, in appointment processes, in access to the good jobs and where the good jobs are located. And they all need to be addressed as part of why, as part of how we're going to get out of the pandemic and move forward in a way that's more equal.
And Helen, is the regional inequality piece really visible in the city? Is it cities in the regions are okay, but the rest of the regions are suffering? How is it?
I mean, just come back to your point on will cities die? My guess is no. To quote Alan Partridge, cities will probably bounce back. So I think, there's work out there showing that even after, World War bombings, cities rebuild, they come back. And I truly believe that what young people want lots of young people want is to move to these cities, get a good job. And also cities, and it's linked to other jobs, cities provide you with amenities, they provide you with restaurants, they provide you with entertainment. This is what these individuals want. So I think that cities will not die. Coming to back, where is the inequality? Yes, there is a north-south divide, but also, and there is, yes, also a sort of core city. Some areas around the periphery can be worse off, but also even within a city like London, there is enormous inequality between the affluent areas of London and the non-affluent areas of London. There's huge differences in employment rates within London, and that's a structural problem that we've already had. The other thing about cities is, the pandemic has hit cities very hard in terms of their health outcomes. In terms of, where deaths have occurred due to the coronavirus, it's been in dense urban areas. So cities have been hit in a number of ways by this pandemic, and it's amplified some of these really important features of cities, that there are pockets of deprivation where people have bad employment outcomes, low pay, but they've also had terrible health outcomes during the pandemic. So, in terms of where to go, the pandemic has really shone a light on that. Will the jobs come back? I think they probably will, but it still relates back to everything we've discussed. That maybe if you live in a deprived area of London, you have got a better chance of getting a job than someone who lives in a deprived area in the north. But actually, what is the quality of that job? The other thing we've not really touched on in this whole session actually is a lot of those people are self-employed, and they're taxi drivers or hairdressers, and are on relatively low wages. We have seen a big increase in self-employed in this country over time, and actually thinking about the wages of them. Sorry, that's off topic again, but if it comes into my head, I feel the need to say it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think we could also think about that.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So I think the stuff about the regional inequality, I think, is absolutely fascinating. And just to build on Helen's point as well about the inequalities within the inequalities, and I think that some cities will be quite resilient to the crisis, and also their ability to bounce back. So a city such as Bristol, high quality of living, relatively small, you can say actually, well, there's a reason why people would want to be there. But if you take a look at a big post-industrial city like Glasgow, which has in the past built itself around large retail, a large centre of activity there, if that doesn't come back, what does a city like Glasgow do? So the challenges that a city like Glasgow might face will be much bigger than a city such as Bristol would face. And then even in rural dimensions as well, you see huge variations. So one of the potential benefits is that if people are going to be working at home more, or going to be having that flexible working, then you can potentially reverse some of the demographic challenges that have existed in some rural areas. So if you go into parts of Scotland, the median age in our islands up in the west coast is 59. That's the median age. It's just unbelievable in the context of where everything else would be. So you've got these huge potential opportunities to use that as a way of reversing some of the big demographic challenges there. But what we're also seeing is large number of people buying second homes in these rural areas because you want somewhere to go on your holidays if the pandemic's going to be around. So then you've got huge housing issues for young people there. So areas where there's potentially greater opportunity to be a young person and to still have a high-paid, productive job, potentially going to get completely frozen out because of the housing issues. So there's real inequalities within all those inequalities that where the regional dimension will play out.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I did see some other hands. There's a gentleman with the blue shirt on. That's it. Yeah.
Thanks. I have 2 questions. Is that all right?
Yep.
Okay. Thanks first to the panel. I thought it's a really interesting discussion. The first thing I think is mostly aimed towards Kudsia. You brought up the point of minimum wage, and as I think was sort of discussed, it's not really the economic climate at the minute for a sort of rising minimum wage given rising inflation and unemployment. And there's been enough discussion around that. But what I thought I would ask is what did the panel sort of think about changes to, say, the reservation wage and how that could be used in terms of labour shortages and productivity as well, if that's a possible thing or consideration to talk about?
I think the minimum wage, economic climate or not, needs to rise, and it needs to rise to a point where people can actually afford to live. The inflation announcement today just highlighted further how hard it is for people to actually live. You know, we've got Christmas coming up, the inflation is at 4.2, and that means people are really, really struggling. We do need a surge forward to a £10 minimum wage as a basic. You know, we've got to really question what we want to say is our baseline for people in this country, and that has got to be part of it. I tend not to veer into territory around the reservation wage. I mean, the economists beside me might have better responses than I do around that. But minimum wage, ideally real living wage, Bristol real living wage. You know, there's a local organisation campaigning around that front. But coupled with things like better sick pay, like better rights in secure contracts, that's going to be how we actually move out of it.
Hugh, have you got thoughts on the interplay with the reservation wage?
But what is the reservation wage?
The reservation wage is the level at which you fall. it's how much money you get if you're not employed, basically. Is what you need to be paid, but for there being for you to have an incentive to work. That's what you.
It's sort of related to sort of things like benefits. It's like the decision whether.
So it sounded like the implication seemed to be that maybe you lower the reservation wage to try and get more people into employment. Was that what you were trying to say?
Extremely unpopular as a policy.
Yeah. So being controversial.
Yeah.
There.
No. I'm familiar with the idea as a theoretical level. I just wanted to check, if you like. So people have a reservation wage at which they'll take work. Yeah. Well, the only way to really lower that, as you say, is to reduce unemployment benefit, as it used to be called. It's probably got some new name now that I haven't kept up with, which is a little bit unpopular. And it goes against the social insurance idea we've been talking about. It's like forcing people to try and find jobs quickly. And there's arguments for and against this. If you make unemployment more costly for people, yes, they will rush and find a job more quickly, but it might not be a very good job, and they get stuck in the wrong job, and then they have to find another job, and there's all sorts of bad effects it has. So there's arguments for and against it, and I don't think at its current level our welfare system is that generous at the moment. I don't think anybody would say it's particularly generous. It may be relative to American systems, but it's not as generous as some continental systems. So, yeah, I don't think that's going to really alter it. And just to come back, unemployment isn't our problem, I don't think. It's been one of the mysteries, if you like. At the beginning of the pandemic, forecasts were saying, we'll have 7-8% unemployed. There'll be massive, big rise in unemployment. But it really hasn't happened. And there's various reasons for that. Partly this great, people leaving the labour force altogether and various that we can discuss this in great detail. But it didn't happen now. And again, it didn't happen really, even in the great financial recession. Unemployment rose less than we thought it was. And I think that's because workers are willing to take pay cuts rather than lose their jobs. And I think this comes back to necessary expenditures. You're hanging on by your teeth, paying your rent and all these other things you have to pay for. So you just can't afford to lose your job, and so you're willing to take cuts in your pay or other things. And I think people just hanging on in there, really, and that's part of the explanation, along with the furlough scheme, of course, which has been very beneficial.
Yeah, it seems like the obviously the labour shortage suggests that employers are going to be chasing the employees, they're chasing the people, so the pay levels you would have thought are going to have to be going up. And so reservation wage, I don't imagine is going to be a huge factor in sort of current thinking at the moment. But in a different environment.
But we have had a cut to universal credit, and we have also the qualifying period for universal credit means that it's not a particularly, it's a hostile credit system. It's a hostile benefit system. So.
They did so I suppose from the Treasury's point of view, they didn't actually cut it. They basically provided a temporary support, which they've removed, and then they actually did improve the, if you ignored that part of it, they did actually improve the terms of universal credit for people in work, because obviously you can see there is very much the ideology in Treasury and the government is to reward work and to basically, and I guess that's part of the reservation wage thing. It's basically that you are encouraged to work through the benefit system in that way, and at the moment with the huge demand for jobs, there might not be that big a backlash for the government. I don't know. Public policy is, Graeme, you might have some thoughts on that. Is it going to come back and bite them? The fact the universal credit card, obviously they've kind of got away with it so far.
Well, we start to get into UK politics here, which is certainly not my area of expertise. I mean, who knows how this is all going to wash out? I mean, I think the issue would be, thinking about cutting the reservation would be potentially if you thought there was a large pool of workers that could come in, and I don't think that's the case at the moment. So I don't know how much that would be as even on a theoretical basis would be that's what seems to be happening, as you're saying, is a huge churn in the labour market, which is the big issue, and just waiting to see where the chips fall on that, I think is for me is a big thing. I think debates around the universal credit have much more to do with ideology, as you say, about making work pay, rather than this is something which is seen as being an effective economic policy at this particular point in time.
Great.
We've got gentleman at the back, Will.
I did the second question, but if there's not time, that's fine.
Oh, can we come back to you?
Yeah.
On the conversation about working from home, I think the panel's missing a trick here, which is for economists and for the students of economics in this room, you're now in A/B testing wonderland. There's a great opportunity here to explore how it could work. So, you know, across organizations and institutions, people are pursuing different policies. Why not look at what's working? Let's look forward, not backwards. If I take my sector, music, for example, hypothetically, if Sony, the record label of Sony, is putting out a Katy Perry album and they're working from the office, and Universal's putting out a Taylor Swift album and they're working from home, and Sony's more successful than Universal, there's a result there that you can work with in terms of what works. And I just feel it's a little bit overly pessimistic, the conversation, because we're dwelling over Office of National Statistics productivity data, often based on recall, often 6 months out of date, often based on surveys. Whereas what we can be doing is like A/B testing and understanding how businesses work. I just feel like, what did Ronald Coase tell us? Understand how a business works first and tease out the economics second, as opposed to assuming you can apply economics to a business. So just to stress the room, there's so much testing you can do by understanding these different policies of working from home, working from office, in terms of what actually works.
Yeah, it's a real-time experiment, and it's going to be quite interesting to see, as you say, when we find out what has worked and what hasn't. I mean, I mean, we are collecting vast amounts of data on everything, not just on our phones, and so hopefully they're collecting vast amounts of data on this. I'm sure.
I mean, people have done experiments, I think, with this type of thing before, but they've typically done them in some quite specific settings. Sort of, are call centre workers more productive if they're all together in the call centre versus at home? And they have found, yes, that there can be productivity benefits from that. But you do, to really work out what works, you do need that experimental setting. And what we've got at the moment is firms which think that working from home will be good for them select to do it, and firms that think that working from home for them will not be good don't do it. So although it's a good test bed at the minute, it's not quite perfect. What I'm really interested in is the lockdown, when firms were literally forced to make people work from home. If we can use that as a kind of experimental setting and look at what happened after that, where firms couldn't select into doing it based on their priors or what they believe, then I think you're right. We can genuinely learn something from that.
We've got a question at the back over here.
Yeah, thanks for a really good panel. My question is actually, ironically, on metrics. So, going back to the inequality question, one of the government's levers with that is setting up a range of sort of funds to give to different places that are sort of classes in need of, requiring sort of economic support. But one of the biggest criticisms with all of these funds is the use of data to sort of set criteria to how the funding is spread across the country. What kind of data or metrics, whether it's like wages or productivity, are best representative of an experience of a place and should therefore be used to like inform how government thinks about how they allocate funding? Because I think people really don't like the idea of using productivity, but what else would you sort of use? Deprivation metrics. It would just be good to get a sense of what would be really give an experience of a place so that you can sort of allocate funding to where it's most needed.
Have you got any thoughts on?
Yeah, that's an interesting part. And this issue of regional allocation, there's something called the Barnet Formula, which people in Scotland and Wales are very familiar with, how you allocate funding. I think just looking at simple things like wages and things are not very good, because the cost of living can vary quite a lot between different regions and so on. So I think you need some more, not just an economic measure, but something that includes things like deprivation and so on. But I'm not really an expert at this, doing that sort of measure, so I might pass it on to my colleague.
Graeme, is that
so I think
your bag?
It's a great question, and I guess it gets to the heart of the whole levelling up debate in the UK at the moment. And I think one of the first questions I would ask before you get into, well, what metrics would you use, is actually what are we wanting to level up to? So is it that we all want to be like London in terms of GVA or productivity, as you mentioned, or is that actually not what we want to do? Are we trying talking about having a different levelling up in the context? So I think even before we ask about what the metrics are, we need to actually think as a country about what it is that we mean by greater regional equality in that context, because we do have huge regional inequalities, but we don't all want to be like London and the life experiences they have there. So I think there's a very fundamental question that I don't think we've answered in the whole levelling up debate about what is it that we're trying to achieve in that context. I think once you do that, then you can start to think about the types of metrics that you want to do there. So is it about tackling levels of poverty across the country? Is it about providing levels of economic opportunity irrespective of where you are? And I think once you've done that, that then starts to help you about actually what policy levers are you going to. So at the moment, a lot of the levelling up debate is simply about, we've got these regional inequalities, we want to narrow the productivity gap, so let's just spend infrastructure, let's just build roads or build rail, and that will level up the country. And I think all the evidence suggests that that's going to be a fruitless exercise, and we've done this for decades now, had these types of debates. So I think it's a great question, and I would say that first of all you want to think about what you want to level up to, then you can then start to look at the metrics you want: poverty, employment rate, inequalities, and then you then think about, well, what levers do you need to use? And they will look radically different in different parts of the country, based on geography, based on the structure of its housing, the structure of its labour market. But that will be quite a radical departure from where public policy has been done in the past on a regional basis within the UK.
Yeah, I imagine another metric would be a regional health metric as well, as a catch-all for pretty much wealth and deprivation.
I mean, I would also look at education right now, because I know there's going to be a session later on during Festival Economics on how has the COVID-19 generation been hit. We know that a lot of what drives differences in just measured average wages across places, the people who live there and the level of education that they have. And governments traditionally thought about, should we have policies that affect people irrespective of where they live? And it will hit different areas differently depending on the composition of people that live there, or should we have policies that affect places? This could be the time to think about where have people lost time in school, education the most, where has the hit been biggest? Should we now have a policy where education funding is not just per pupil, but per pupil and also place-based? So that could also, I think, contribute to the levelling up agenda if we thought about how we spend on schools, not just across kids, but across where those kids live.
There was a question here, gentleman in the mask. You get the mic to him, thanks.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's kind of related to that, actually, and looking at regional inequalities, and we talked a lot about working from home. But what happens to sort of the places of work, and whether we need to sort of adapt, not fit for all industries, of course, but adapting office spaces and looking at the smaller towns and cities in which perhaps we want to level up. And do we have to look at what buildings there are, and are they fit for purpose if we want new, flexible, hybrid ways of working? So it just kind of expanding on that a little bit. And I think the gentleman's point before me in terms of those metrics that we use and looking at a more place-based approach sounds really sort of sensible to me. Less of a question, more of a sort of comment.
I mean, I think it's a good point, and actually, this is one of the economists will always say, look at what the market's doing, and I guess if you go and talk to American real estate companies or people who rent out commercial space, they are probably already reacting to what they think demand will be like. Perhaps, if PwC is really telling everyone to work from home, they will be scaling down their operations or changing the way they work. So I would think that's one of the questions where you can almost go and just chat to someone in the industry, and they will tell you much better than I would be able to tell you about what they predict will happen over the next 5 years. Whether there is demand in smaller towns or whether it's all in central Manchester, central London is going to be very interesting.
But I do think there's going to be great opportunity. Obviously, there's going to be less demand for office space. It'll become cheaper, and it's become very, very expensive. And so it's going to be a great opportunity for startups and new firms to get their hands on office space, to use in some way, for new businesses. So I think we'll see it'll benefit a lot of new startups and so on in cities, but also outside, I think, as well.
Yeah. The one thing I would say about that is, again, the variation in type of city, I think, will be really important in that regard. So again, a place like Bristol, where people live close to the city centre, it's got a nice quality of life. You could see actually converting offices to residential, whatever, would work quite well. But again, other big post-industrial cities where the office blocks have been large numbers of call centre people, or it's been a big retail part of it, if they pull out, what's left in the city centre doesn't become attractive immediately to turning it into residential. So you need to radically rethink your city in a much more significant way than you've done in the past, because the two big activities there pull out. If no one lives there already, then actually not many people are wanting to go and live there at the start. So you've got to have a real long-term plan for how you would reinvigorate your cities, and that will vary hugely across different parts of the country depending on the type of city they are.
Yeah, it's amazing. So working from home seems like such a simple thing, just work in your bedroom.
We've done some work with some of the metropolitan mayors in this space, and it has been exactly around that, and a lot of the conversation before it's even been around how you allocate and use office space has been about what infrastructure investment there has to be in transport, in public transport, in access to services, and it goes back to what you were saying, is what do you want the outcome to be, what are we looking at, and let's start from that point.
Yeah.
And it varies. It's in the conversations we've had, it's been really varied depending on where in the country that conversation is happening.
There was a gentleman over here with a question.
We covered the argument that technology is inevitably continually reducing the demand for work, and that we won't be able to rely on work as a sound source of income, as we currently aren't, that there is therefore a likely need for us to increase non-work forms of income, such as a basic income.
Big question.
Yeah, no, I think that there is this, and it is an important issue. I mean, in the past, this wolf has been called before. I remember people talking about this decades ago. And other new forms of work have come in. The service sector's grown massively. But I think there are issues here. I mean, you can dream about that, but to make it a reality is quite difficult. There are quite big political forces moving against it, I think. And so we can look at the move towards universal basic income. So they had a go in Scotland, citizens' income, I think it was called, and that didn't work out, largely because in Britain, of course, we have a tax system which is based on the individual, but the benefit system is based on the household or who you're living with, and the two systems just don't gel at all. In other countries, it might be easier for them to do it, and there is the possibility of having universal basic income, but I think a lot of businesses will fight against it, and in some countries, the dollars count, and there's a lot of political influence in there, and so we can dream about it, yes, and it would be a good idea, but there's a lot of objective interests which are against it, I think, but yeah.
We're coming up to the end of the hour and a half, but so if there are any sort of final questions, yeah, there's a lady over here. Sorry, could I get the mic over on this side? Yeah.
So I was just wondering, in terms of, just increasing the minimum wage, of how much of a impact that would have on the long term in terms of this issue with not that low unemployment, but people not being able to have enough money to live, just in general in the country. Because what seems to be is that there's some sort of issue in the labour market in terms of the value of labour. Because if someone's working full time and they're a functioning member of society and they have a function in society, and they're not having enough money from their wage to actually live, there's an issue that if only a minimum wage is increased in time when there's inflation, surely that issue is just going to come up again and again and again, perpetually, unless the actual issue of the value of labour in general and every function in society is looked at. And I was just wondering if there were other kind of policies and ideas that you had on this kind of idea of what other things need to be done so that that actual value is seen.
So it's non-wage payments or just higher wages in general?
Or just allocating like a wage where people can actually live in a society without it just being like moving the minimum wage up, which may then just have to keep happening if there is inflation.
Yeah, the minimum wage is going up by more than inflation. I think it's going at 6.5%, the latest one. But it's a good point. The point is that living standards seem to be perpetually catching up with the minimum wage, and so it's not really an increase in the living wage or whatever.
Yeah, I think that there's a sense of you need to also alter the objective factors within the market. So, solving the housing crisis. The housing crisis has been going on for decades. People have talked about it, but governments just seem incapable of acting. And to some extent, they know what the solution is. They, for example, they need to build more houses in the southeast and things like that. So I think it's those underlying structural factors. So it's you can't just raising minimum wages. That will have an effect. And I think it's a good short-run thing to do. But as you say, it doesn't really solve the underlying thing, which is the objective amount, the fact that it's so expensive to find somewhere to live. And inequality makes it much worse because you've got, people having second homes, rich people can have second homes, hedge funds can be buying at lots of houses in America, apparently, and maybe it's even happening in this country. So there's lots of things going on, and I think those need to be addressed, I think, and targeted. I don't know what other people think.
No, I agree, and I think... we only ever talk about wage as one aspect of what needs to change. We need to think about how jobs are designed, progression people can have in their jobs, and also skills and development. For a long time, the low-wage jobs are the jobs where people don't get the professional development, access to support, and access to really exercise social justice and social mobility and move out. And we can talk about all of those things forever, but if we don't address the cost of housing and we don't address the cost of childcare, we don't address casualisation and those kinds of things, then we are, like you said, just never going to break the cycle and move out of it, no matter how much we rise the minimum wage. So yes, that, but lots of other things too.
Well, thank you very much. I think we're out of time now. It's been a pleasure to host this panel. Brilliant observations. Lots of food for thought. And thank you very much for joining us.